Hey, you guys in the chat, can you all hear me? Fantastic. About 5-10 minutes here, Doomer should be showing up. Hey, Doomer, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, how's it going, man?
Hey, pretty good. How about you?
Good, good. I wanted to talk to you about the video you made. I'm sure you're kind of sick about talking about Vaush ad nauseum. I can only imagine the amount of time you spent talking about this guy. But I kind of wanted to talk to you about just the state of online politics in general. I kind of wanted to get your take on that.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, the video was initially not just about Vaush; it was kind of about everyone. So, a lot of these problems are common amongst basically everybody who talks in the online political sphere.
Right. I mean, I'll give you my experience. So I've got a 4-month-old son, and my wife and I sort of naively said, hey, no technology in the house, right? No iPhones, no video games, and we're only 4 months into this thing, and we're already starting to break our own rules, right? We got a flight coming up, and we got an iPad ready to go, and I mean, this stuff it saturates everything, right? And it's just getting more addictive, and it's everywhere. I mean, so I wasn't that concerned about it, right? And then I watch your video and I see this guy on a platform where 1 out of every 5 viewer is aged like 13 to 17, something like that. And he's literally speaking about how to create environmental terrorist booby traps. I think, is that
Yeah, it was. I don't know if booby trap is appropriate, but I mean, it's basically the same. Yeah, it's the same goal. It's like, um, I mean, it's such a weird thing to say, but yeah, basically trying to get people to like kill themselves, cutting down trees and stuff. Yeah.
right? And then sort of explicitly looking at the camera and winking and nodding and saying, hey, don't do this, wink, wink. I mean, so I guess my question for you is why isn't there more attention on this subject? I mean, you would think this sort of thing would be in the news constantly, right? People love to fearmonger. There's a huge financial incentive to sort of scare people. I mean, why aren't people talking about this, do you think?
You mean about the online political people? I mean, they're just not really big enough. Like Vaush is pretty big in online politics, but he's not big compared to like MSNBC or something, right? Um, I mean, it's certainly something that could happen because obviously old media is sort of threatened by new media. Um, so there's sort of that angle. They could, it's kind of like how PewDiePie got scaremongered about for a while. But I mean, I think it's mostly just that a lot of these people are pretty irrelevant, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I guess the example I would use. So if you look like prime time, say I think you said MSNBC for example. I think Rachel Maddow averages around like 190,000 viewers. That's prime time TV. So if you look at like the same, so you look at
Oh,
someone like Vaush, he averages actually slightly more than that. And his most popular videos, you're getting into the area of like Tucker Carlson, like literally primetime news, right? So I mean, he's got videos that double something like Tucker Carlson averages like 300,000 people a night. I mean, Vaush has got, viewers, sometimes 600, 800,000 viewers, right? So I just wonder, like, I mean, I think he's actually said like he makes seven figures. You know what I mean? So I mean, it is a huge industry. So do you just think, like maybe when you said it's kind of irrelevant, do you think their impact is irrelevant? Like what people are getting from Vaush isn't? It's more entertainment. It's not inherently political.
Well, I think the perception is that it's irrelevant. I don't actually think it is irrelevant. I mean, I wouldn't have made the last section of the video if I thought it was completely irrelevant, right? Um, the rhetoric definitely has an effect. I just don't think that that effect has been legitimized yet. Personally, I think that basically old media is just kind of going to go away for the most part, or at least its perceived significance is going to dramatically decrease. People like I don't think I've ever owned a television since I moved out of my house. That was like 10 years ago. It's very common for people my age, mid 30s and younger, to just, do things online, to watch Twitch or to watch YouTube or something like that. And I think the increase of these platforms in general is just going to increase. So to me, it's significant, but I think the reason that like sort of the earlier question you were asking is like, why isn't this talked about in broader society? I think the perception would be, oh, it's just a bunch of nerds online, who cares? Personally, I don't think it's irrelevant. Vaush's audience, like you said, it's big enough to certainly have an effect. And some of the things that he said are like viscerally disgusting. So, it would be sort of an issue if 1,000 people heard it, much less, 150,000 people who might potentially hear it between his streams and his videos and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, the perception is probably that these things aren't super important, but I think they are. Obviously, it's hard to judge exactly how important they are, but from your perception, I think you probably have a very good vantage point as to why this would be an issue. The older I've gotten, honestly, the more I've kind of thought that the Amish had figured things out to some degree, right? There's some serious downsides to technology. I have a feeling that I would do basically the same thing that you and your wife were talking about, where if I was to have a kid, I wouldn't want them to. I would want to minimize the impact of technology as much as possible. And I don't know as to what necessarily can be done about the problem in general, because there is going to be sort of a democratization of these influencers and content creators. I don't think there's any stopping that. That's just going to happen. And it seems to be like I'm personally very, very hard on the mainstream media. But unfortunately, alternative media seems to be even worse. Alternative media figures tend to be very, very fixated on a single like ideology or perspective, and often just churn out incredible amounts of misinformation. Like Vaush is pretty bad, but there are people who are worse, right? If you're looking at big alternative media figures, right? Obviously, maybe someone like Alex Jones or Tim Pool. Tim Pool seems to make news segments about articles he hasn't even read. So even if you agree with his perspective, it's just a very, very reckless way of handling things. And that's before mentioning people who are more niche figures who just say things that are just, completely, even crazier than Alex Jones, which is quite crazy. So I mean, the only like solution from your perspective that I would think is just try and avoid this stuff, and obviously educate your children to try and recognize nonsense when they hear it. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big problem. I don't really see it going away, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Unfortunately, my wife and I, we recently moved to Seattle, so we're in the belly of the beast right now. But that's a separate topic. I mean, it is shocking to me. If you think about it, you've basically got a major what I would call sort of a news network. It's owned by Jeff Bezos. It's completely unregulated and extremely incendiary, and it's aimed at children. I mean, like 1 out of 5 Twitch users, I think they're like 13 or something like that. I mean, so I don't. I think I know some of your politics. I think you said you're maybe left wing or social democrat or something like that. So, I mean, what are your views in terms of like regulation? Do you think we should just let people figure this stuff out, or you think the government should get involved? Or I mean, what do you think personally?
That is a very difficult question to answer. I don't generally speaking have very strong beliefs about tech censorship. Um, it's kind of a new thing, right? Because there's always been, I think it was in like the 40s with the nephew of Freud, with the beginning of the public relations industry. There's always been some degree of propaganda, some degree of manufacturing consent, and of building narratives and stuff like that. Um, but we're seeing it now in a way that's uh, it seems to be quite new. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, you would have uh, the news, and the news could be quite biased, especially in favor of, let's say, the dominant narrative. If we're about to go to war with somebody, you're probably not going to see um, what might be considered an appropriate level of pushback in the mainstream media, right? But you didn't have people, getting on the news and saying, you shouldn't take vaccines. Uh, the election is stolen. The government is run by a cabal of lizard people. uh, you know Society is just this massive oppressive, basically white supremacist institution that's designed to just oppress people, and that's all it does, and that's the point. um, there's so many of these narratives now that it seems like most of the big influencers are pushing one of them. um, and like the whole lizard people thing sounds silly, but it's actually not as silly as some of the other things that people would push out. So what do you do about that in terms of policy? I'm not entirely sure. It's very difficult to expect a social media platform to censor its content. It's just too big of a problem. There's probably certain things you can do, like, for example, it wouldn't be difficult to, design an algorithm that would censor specific pieces of misinformation. Like, let's say there was um, some specific piece of COVID misinformation that was being spread, and Twitter wanted to stop that. That wouldn't be terribly difficult, but it's pretty difficult to stop like anybody who wants to express COVID misinformation. That I don't see as to how that's practical. So if you hold the platform responsible, um, they're put in a position where the platform might become unusable due to the level of censorship that would be required, um, to try and do that. I don't know exactly what should be done. Uh, yeah, I don't really know. I'm kind of skeptical of placing really, really heavy burdens on tech companies to take care of everything. And I don't think, like, I simultaneously don't think it's entirely a tech company's responsibility to deal with this, but I also don't think that they have no responsibility, right? Um, but as for the exact intervention, I'm really not sure. I don't know how to deal with this.
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. It's funny you mentioned lizard people. There was a story in Florida last week, hashtag Florida man. That's actually where I'm from originally, Florida. And there's an individual who, this is horrifying. He actually killed his children because he thought they had serpent DNA or something. He had been exposed to all this online media, and he thought his children were lizard people, essentially. So, I mean, that's the worst case scenario. You're looking at something like that.
Yeah, that was QAnon related.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that you brought up the algorithms. That's a great point. I think that's what incentivizes a lot of this stuff, right? And I felt this myself. I mean, I'm kind of a late adopter. I made my first Twitter account like a week ago, and I consider myself a pretty, I'm a laid back guy. I'm not super confrontational, and I already feel the incentive to sort of create drama and get in arguments with people and act incendiary. I mean, I've already seen its effect on myself. I've only been doing this for a week, right? So, I mean, do you think, I know some people have said we should make the algorithms open source. Some people have said we need to treat social media like a public utility, nationalize it. I know there's a lot of there's a lot of focus on, it's basically Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Clause, which is it's a bill. You would think a lot of this stuff is sort of enshrined in the Constitution, but most of the protections that social media companies have, it's one minor section of a minor law passed in 1990. And if you look into it, there's a huge fight going on right now. Mark Zuckerberg's trying to completely rewrite the clause. But I'm just wondering, as far as like, are there any of these solutions you've seen that stand out to you, or is it really just you think it's way too complicated?
Yeah, I'm really unsure. Like I most of the proposed solutions that I've heard seem to have some sort of a problem. Like I mean, probably the most practical solution is to have some sort of a machine learning thing that recognizes patterns and is wrong, you know, 1 out of every 1,000 times. And then you have like an appeal system. It's like, you know, the robot banned me for no reason. Um, I mean, that's probably the most practical solution, and I'm a pretty practical person, so maybe that's what'll end up happening. But I mean, that's basically what happens with the YouTube algorithm, and you know, it can be quite bad. You know, we see a lot of problems with people getting, you know, falsely flagged, people losing out on tons of income, or people being incorrectly flagged for not being able to monetize, or you know, this, that, or the other. Um, I'm really, I just don't know, because there's so many. My overall feeling is just that like these platforms are kind of cancer, and that they're just inherently um, unhealthy, and that really, if you were acting in your own rational self-interest, you would just mostly not use them. Um, like I mostly haven't used Twitter. I've been almost kind of similar to you. I've mostly used it over the last week because I made a video and now I have like 1,000 followers and actually people to talk to. So this is sort of the first time I've actually experienced these things. But it seems to be just overall a pretty unhealthy platform. Um, it would be healthy if I just kind of stuck to shit posting, but obviously people say mean things to me and I say mean things back, and it's just not very productive. Um, and one thing I noticed having made the video is that, you know, the response to my video has overall been quite good. It's like I think the last time I checked, it was like a 14-to-1 like to dislike ratio or something like that, which is quite good. And most of the comments are quite positive, but I hardly even notice the people who like my video. I notice the people who are like bitching. Um, and a lot of the complaining is just, I mean, it's absolute nonsense. It I would say that a lot of it seems to come from people who probably didn't even watch my video. Otherwise, how could they say the things that they're saying? And then the people who have watched the video get completely hung up on these like nonsensical, nitpicky details that don't even affect my argument. Um, like the main thing people have criticized is it's just a giant nitpick. It doesn't even affect my argument. And this is the main thing that people are like complaining about. And rationally, I should just be like, oh, well, that's not a big deal. Whatever. These people are dumb. Move on with my day. But it's very hard to not fixate on it. and you fixate on it more than you fixate on, you know, the 10 times more people who just liked it. Um, I think a lot of that just sort of comes from problems in human nature. I mean, you could say in terms of evolutionary psychology or whatever, it would be like, you know, you have to have a very strong incentive to avoid negative stimuli, like a tiger in a bush or whatever. You need to be super, super concerned with that. So anything that, you know, anything that might have a negative connotation, people fixate on very heavily. It's probably something like that. But yeah, you just can't get away from it. And that just kind of makes social media environments really toxic. And they also foster echo chambers, and yeah, I don't know. I think on a personal level, the best thing you can do is just not use these services for the most part, or at least minimize your impact. Some people can use them sort of responsibly in a way that can make their life healthier. But I think most people, on an individual level, the solution is just not to use them. And as a society, I mean, who knows? There's a reason I'm not in charge, right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I live in Washington, so I know some people that work for Microsoft, and it's almost unanimous that none of these people let their kids use social media. You would be shocked. It's probably like 99% across the board. So I mean, they know what's going on. So, but it's funny you say that. That we've kind of got a situation where it's the worst of technology and biology. You're talking about the negative stimulus. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why you look at underage young women, you know, depression and suicide rates are through the roof right now. They're at the point where under the age of like 16, young women are starting to catch up to men for the first time in human history. So, I mean, you know, it's kind of horrifying. But one other thing I wanted to ask you about. So I posted, someone made a highlight reel of basically the most sort of horrifying statements Vaush had made. This is like, the explicit calls to violence, and like we talked about, sort of rigging chainsaws to backfire and this sort of thing. And it was sort of the question posed was, should he be deplatformed by Amazon? And I actually posted this in a right-wing space, and the answer I got was almost unanimously, no, don't deplatform him, which I thought was kind of surprising. In a way, I appreciate that, but I'm just kind of curious what your views are on this whole thing, like cancel culture, deplatforming, whatever you want to call it. I mean, how do you view that?
So it's very okay. This is a difficult thing to address, because if this sort of gets to the question of why I changed the title of the video. So if we're going to hold Vaush today accountable for all of the things that he's done, I think it would be perfectly reasonable to say something like being temporarily banned for a while as punishment for some of the things that he's done would be completely reasonable. Permanent deplatforming, I don't think so. It is kind of undeniable that he's gotten better about these things. There's certain things he hasn't gotten better about. Some of his worst anti-police rhetoric, for example, is pretty recent. People are, getting on my ass for posting a bunch of clips that are old, but a lot of the police clips are new. I Googled my script and I had 60 different clips just from this year. So it's not like I was just clip chimping with old clips. A lot of the police stuff is pretty recent, but his explicit calls for violence are mostly from sort of the beginning of his career. I don't know exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the punishment should be, but there should be. I think there should be some sort of a penalty for saying some of the things that he said, because it is just a completely straightforward and reasonable thing to observe that there could be consequences for these things. You have an audience of hundreds of thousands of people, and unfortunately, he's become quite good at putting ideas in his audience's mind without directly stating them. Like you said, he'll say things with a wink and a nod, or he'll find some roundabout way to put the idea in his audience's mind that, political violence actually is fine. More recently, his favorite one is that, of course, I'm in favor of political violence. Everyone's in favor of political violence. If you think the American government should exist, then you're supporting state violence. So you're also in favor of political violence. And this is, it's just an equivocation. It's trying to say that it's trying to say that the statement, I'm in favor of political violence, means nothing, because everyone's in favor of political violence. But then you would ask him, are you in favor of punching Nazis? Yes. Are you in favor of violent revolution? Yes. If he was in private, are you in favor of violence against police? He probably would be, right? So it's just a smokescreen to try and conceal that. I don't know what to do to deal with people who lie in that way. So it's actually personally affected me. I was in an industry that was the target of let's call it a slanderous media campaign that successfully destroyed sort of the sub-industry that I was working in. And I still to this day have no evidence that what they were implying had any evidentiary basis at all. There are a lot of ways to put an idea in the audience's mind without directly stating it. And I had a really good example. I don't remember all of the details, but it would be like saying someone was murdered and we can't say Samantha did it. What we can say was that Samantha had motive. Samantha has no alibi. No one knows where Samantha was. Something that might belong to Samantha was found at the scene. Just place all of these things that might apply to this person without any actual direct evidence. And if you rack up enough of them, you can convince basically anyone who reads that, hey, Samantha probably killed this person. But you haven't even gotten to the point of providing a single piece of evidence that links the person to this event. That doesn't really make a difference. You can still get the audience to believe it. So that's sort of the thing that happened in my case. And Vaush will do something similar, where he won't directly advocate for political violence, but he will say a number of things that, if the audience buys into, point in a very obvious direction. How do you deal with that? I really don't know. When that happened, I was really, really upset by it. And I was pretty much in favor of doing away with press freedoms to some degree, because it's this is just so disgusting. You can't allow people to use these things as a protective shield to just attack people. Not that I wouldn't want the press to have any protections, but that there's nuance. There's just this area to be exploited that seems ripe for misuse, and it still is, but it's very difficult to have a policy prescription as to how to deal with it precisely. Um, we've seen a lot of misinformation around certain things. Like, I mean, if you're on the right, Russiagate coverage might be a good example. There's just sort of a million examples of people that made claims that were, um, not supported by evidence, that put a certain idea in people's minds and potentially had consequences, right? And what exactly do you do about it? Personally, I think, because this is something I thought about a good deal, I think it might be a good idea that if someone is a public figure in the role of like a journalist, for example, or maybe a streamer, and they're actively promoting misinformation, like they're directly saying things that aren't true, um, I think it might be reasonable to consider having a penalty there, because not having a penalty, um, there's just too much opportunity for that to go wrong. And what if you were to do that? It wouldn't stop people from lying. What it would do is it would cause people to soften their language, and maybe it wouldn't even make much of a difference. As for people that are indirectly calling for these things, I don't really think that there's much that you can do, unfortunately. Um, and this is sort of the problem: is that you have a problem of enforcement. Even if you could directly say, um, "You lied about this. This has these consequences." The only real thing that could be conceivable to do is what happened to Alex Jones, is to have them deplatformed. But that wasn't something that happened through the legal system. That was something that happened extra legally through tech companies deciding not to host him on their services. And tech companies would never do that, for example, for a major news broadcasting company that they have every reason to be allied with. So unfortunately, I don't know that there really is a good solution. Personally, I think that going on a media platform and spreading misinformation is immoral. And I don't know exactly what the threshold should be, but I would be fine with some sort of a sanction there, if for no other reason than to create a deterrent effect where journalists would feel a greater degree of responsibility in reporting things responsibly and not spreading misinformation. Um, but again, I don't know what all the consequences for a policy like that would be. It's just I find it to be viscerally very disgusting.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if you're familiar with Curtis Yarvin, Mencius Mollbug at all, but he's got this idea that since the Supreme Court's ruling on the Pentagon Papers, what's essentially happened is that the state has been slowly leaking sovereignty to the media at large. So it's kind of an interesting thought experiment. Like, if you had to pick one institution that was coming after you and one institution that would spend all of their resources protecting you, who would you pick? So the two institutions you have to pick from are, say, the Department of Justice on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have tech and the media at large. So would you rather be protected by the entirety of the resources of, say, Facebook and the New York Times, or would you rather be protected by the Justice Department? And I actually don't know if there's a straightforward answer to that. Like, if Zuckerberg and Bezos and all these guys decided tomorrow that they were going to dedicate the entirety of their organizations to ruining the life of Doomerpolitics, I mean, that it kind of goes to show you just how powerful they are, you know?
Well, they like the media could destroy my public image, but if the Department of Justice is on my side, I won't be going to jail. So it's hard to pass that up. Um, I mean, this is kind of it's sort of a personal answer, because I've almost purposefully burned my life down several times and just done something completely new. So I would be fine to just go with that option. It's like, okay, Department of Justice protects me. We don't go to jail. My public image is ruined, and I have to go away and do something else. That wouldn't be a big deal to me. But I can see the essence of the answer is that if media companies decide they want to destroy you, there's a considerable amount of damage that they could do. And I had kind of a thought experiment along these lines where people seem to be completely fine with like deplatforming and getting people fired as though it's a of minor consequence. But I think this is a perspective that's largely held by people who have never had a job they really care about. Um, and I have. So I've been in a position where if you gave me the choice between losing my job and being beaten within an inch of my life, I would have taken being beaten within an inch of my life, right?
For sure.
Um, Unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't understand that, because their idea of work is like, they're, in high school or college or whatever, and they're just waiting tables or whatever we do when we're 18. But yeah, if you have something that you've worked for your entire life, That's probably the thing that you would least like to lose. And yeah, it's true that media companies can absolutely just take that from you, and there's nothing really anyone can do about it, right? This is sort of the problem with. I was actually discussing this with a philosophy professor. It's basically like the idea of canceling someone is sort of like an extrajudicial form of justice, and there's no defense against it, really. If someone's able to cause enough of a ruckus, then there's no way the company's going to protect you. They stand to lose too much. So it's always going to work, whether you're innocent or not. And then if you are innocent, what is going to happen? Like your reputation does get permanently ruined. Being vindicated doesn't really change anything, right? Like, let's say that someone was canceled and then it came out there was like definitive evidence that they did nothing wrong. Maybe you would recover your reputation in the eyes of the internet to some degree, but in terms of like getting another job, isn't gonna. I mean, you're probably just kind of fucked for life, right? There's just going to be this black stain on your resume that is never going to go away. So yeah, I can definitely see the punitive power at work there at the hands of the media, but I would take that over prison personally.
Yeah, for sure. I see where you're coming from. I guess if I had to play devil's advocate, the argument someone like Yarvin would make there is that the New York Times has a lot of influence over the Justice Department, so they could maybe pull some strings and influence them. You know what I mean? But I definitely see where when you're talking about canceling. It essentially is, and I consider myself a populist in some ways, but cancel culture, it is the modern equivalent of like a technical populist lynching. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And it's funny you talk about the media. Are you familiar with Conquest's Rule of Politics?
Who?
Robert Conquest's Rules of Politics.
Oh no.
So one of them is everyone's most conservative about what they know best. And
oh yeah, I heard Distributus mention that in the video.
Yeah. Right. And it's especially true when you get into the media. I mean, the most red pilling moments I've ever seen, and especially on far left individuals, is when the news covers something that's very close to them, and they just realize how wrong so many of these sources are.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of distrust for media organizations, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I think if I had to guess what the trajectory of Vaush is going to be going forward, that all the financial incentives are aligned in a way where he's going to just kind of leave all the more incendiary stuff behind. It's kind of what you see with I'd use drug dealers as an example, where they get their initial capital investment through all these nefarious means, and then they use that money to launder it into more legitimate businesses. You know what I mean? And then after a while, you have a certain amount of capital you can use to just legally get yourself by. So, I mean, we're here talking about canceling him right now, theoretically. So if I had to guess going forward, I would imagine he's going to be much more, I think mask on is what the kids call it. I mean, what overall, I don't know. I guess that would be a net good thing overall, right? If he's not, teaching kids violence.
Yeah, that's basically what Adam Friend had said. I was talking to him. I mean, he laid out almost exactly the same scenario, and I just agreed with him. Yeah, I think that's right. I definitely think that his rhetoric will be less incendiary, both for the financial incentives and to toot my own horn, because I released this video that apparently everyone watched.
It's true.
And it sort of puts a thought in the back of people's minds where people are going to kind of be on the lookout for these things. Like, one of the things that I came across when I was watching these videos was that a lot of the stuff that's pretty bad, I didn't even notice the first time I watched it, and I was watching it to make a hit piece on him. And even I didn't notice it. Certainly it would just sort of drift right by his fans. But as I watched more and more videos, I started to notice patterns. Like the one that I explicitly pointed out is, he'll say something like, "I'm going to make every attempt to be charitable," or something like that. And almost every time he makes a statement like that, he does the opposite. So it becomes something that you notice. And then after a while, every time he says something even vaguely close to that, I know to laser focus in on what he's about to say, because it's probably going to be the opposite. So the same thing is probably true now for people who watched the video. They've seen him do certain things in a pretty substantial concentration, and he's going to have to kind of be on high alert for some of that stuff, right? It'll be really interesting, honestly, to see how he reacts. Although, I mean, I'm not even sure that I'm going to continue watching his content. I'll probably see some of it later, or people will link it to me or whatever. But theoretically, it'll be really interesting to see how he responds, because on the one hand, I think a lot of the reason, like you said, that he got his initial audience was doing things like saying all conservatives are racist, all conservatives are fascists. But can he continue to do that? I don't know. Certainly he can't do certain things like the performative cruelty with that cop. There's no way he could do that again. Like that would get him an incredible amount of negative attention were it to happen again. So yeah, the police rhetoric probably has to soften. I would guess that the conservative rhetoric has to soften a good deal, sort of the calling everyone Nazi stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if he almost totally retired the word Nazi, and he sort of retreated to alt-right and white nationalists. That would probably be my guess. That would be an easy way to sort of optically recover while sending almost exactly the same idea. But yeah.
Yeah, no, the police officer thing in particular, it's kind of shocking that that alone didn't get him banned. Just explicitly saying, "Hey, go harass this woman." I mean, it kind of boggles the mind. But I don't want to, trying to think how much I should say here. I don't want to dox myself, but I live in the same general area as Vaush. I kind of know that for some. I'll tell you about it off stream, but I have it on good authority that you kind of put the fear of God into the guy. So you have a good reason to toot your own horn. I'll say that. So one other thing I wanted to talk to you about. It's one thing I've noticed about you. I watched one other live stream you did, and I've noticed you seem just like you don't seem like a crazy person, which I appreciate. I think we need more of that on the internet. A lot of young people online, some of the people they look up to. I mean, the bar is so low, man. So I was just wondering, I mean, what do you think we could do about that going forward? Are there any other streamers or content creators in particular you would shout out, do you think are not a horrible influence?
Hold on, let me pull up my people I follow on Twitter, because there definitely are some people. So unfortunately, I talked with I'm not going to say who, but I talked with a content creator about this exact topic. Unfortunately, the incentives are aligned such that the best ways to make money are to be irresponsible and bombastic and performative and way over the top. I don't know that there, I mean, I guess I'll be testing the waters here, whether there's a market for people who are less incendiary and, a bit more calm and empathetic and, not screaming that the world is ending. If there is a market for that, maybe I'll be successful. But yeah, so Dr. Heamed Out is pretty reasonable. Dylan Burns, for the most part, is pretty reasonable. I really like Irrelevant, although he streams in the middle of the night. Most people probably couldn't see him. I haven't seen much of Adam Friended's content. I've only seen a little bit of it. I think all the people I just shouted out were left-leaning. I get the impression that Adam might be right-leaning, but I really enjoyed talking to him. He seemed like a really nice guy. I guess I can't say that his content is completely good because I haven't seen all of it, but when I was talking to him, he seemed like an incredibly nice guy. Counterpoints is another right-leaning guy who's pretty reasonable. Bastiat is pretty reasonable. I really like Riley Grace Rochong. Yeah, a lot of these people are not going for this sort of extreme performative rhetoric, but you'll also notice that nobody I mentioned there is like as big as Vaush, right? At least I don't think they are. Unfortunately, and this is just, I don't think this is really going to change. I have a pretty negative opinion of people on average, and people don't like having their preconceptions challenged. So there's always going to be, I think, a bigger market for someone that will just say, I represent your worldview and I'm going to tell you everything you want to hear. Then there is going to be for someone who's actually going to challenge people's worldview. I don't think that will ever change, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the problems is that the algorithms are engagement based, and things that make you angry are always going to drive more engagement. So there's always this incentive to piss people off and, create, fights and arguments and all this sort of stuff. But I think we pretty much wrap up there, man. Is there anything else you want to plug? I know you're working on a new video, or is there anything else you want to kind of discuss?
Oh, no, I usually just like come on and answer people's questions. I don't really know what to ask myself. Yeah, I don't know. I have a YouTube channel where I make dumb YouTube videos called Doomerpolitics. Tune in if you want. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure, man. Have you decided if you're going to make another video yet?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. I need to catch up on schoolwork, but I'm pretty sure in about 2 to 3 weeks I'll have another video out.
Right on. Oh, one other thing. Somebody told me you worked with Jordan Peterson. Is that true?
I didn't work with Jordan Peterson. I interviewed Jordan Peterson. Although
Oh, okay. Okay. What is he like? The saying goes, never meet your heroes. How was he in person?
I don't know. He was kind of like a normal, nice dude. I mean, it's pretty much just the way he is when he talks to people. I didn't notice much difference. I was mostly asking him questions about psychology. Most people are interested in him for his political takes. I am one of the rare people who really appreciate his psychology work. So that's largely what we were talking about. He like contributed to something called the Big Five Aspect Scale. It's this whole nerdy thing. But yeah, we were talking about that.
Okay, so you guys didn't get a chance to talk about slaying the dragon to rescue the ghost of your father from the belly of the whale.
No, we didn't. No.
All right, man. I appreciate you coming on, dude. It was great talking to you. Your video is awesome. If anybody hasn't seen it, go check it out. It's one of the best. Just really a compilation of what's wrong with the online ecosystem right now. So yeah, thanks again, man. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good night.